The morning sun painted golden stripes across 17-year-old Lena Cena's bedroom walls, illuminating the faces of her heroes, scientists, activists, and athletes who had changed the world. She stood before her mirror, fingers weaving through her long black curls, each strand a testament to her heritage and a living memory of her mother. These weren't just curls. They were her crown, her identity, her connection to the woman who had died when Lena was only 10 years old. Her father, John Cena, had taught her to wear them with pride, to never let anyone dim her light or make her feel less than extraordinary. "You're going to kill them today, kid," John said, entering with breakfast on a small plate. His eyes sparkled with the same warmth that had carried them both through years of grief and healing. "Kill them with knowledge, right?" Lena smirked, adjusting her glasses. "That's my girl." He kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of the coconut oil she used to keep her curls healthy and strong. They shared these quiet mornings often, father and daughter bonding over scrambled eggs and dreams of the future. Lena talked excitedly about her upcoming history presentation on the civil rights movement. She loved these projects because they gave her a chance to lead, to speak up for others, to help classmates find their voices. At North Valley High School, Lena commanded quiet respect. She wasn't the loudest student, but when she spoke, people listened. Teachers appreciated her focus and dedication. Most of them, anyway. The exception was Miss Simmons. Margaret Simmons was 43 years old and bitter as winter coffee. Her smile never reached her eyes, and though she claimed to treat all students equally, there was a disturbing pattern in her behavior. Black and brown students faced harsher criticism, lower grades, and constant microaggressions disguised as discipline. The trouble had started early in the semester when Lena politely corrected Miss Simmons about a historical fact regarding the Montgomery bus boycott. The correction was gentle, respectful, and absolutely accurate, but it struck a nerve in the teacher who couldn't tolerate being challenged by someone she viewed as beneath her. From that moment, Miss Simmons watched Lena like a predator studying prey. She nitpicked essays, called on Lena excessively, and made cutting remarks about her attitude, even when Lena had done nothing wrong. Other teachers noticed the tension. Students whispered about it, but Lena endured it with the dignity her father had taught her. That Monday morning, Lena walked through the familiar hallways with confidence, her backpack slung over one shoulder. Students greeted her with smiles and high fives. She had no idea that Miss Simmons had already decided to destroy her. In the teacher's lounge earlier that morning, Miss Simmons had scrolled through social media, her coffee growing cold as jealousy burned in her chest. She'd found Lena's Instagram post, a selfie in front of her presentation board with the caption, "Proud of our work, proud of my story." Something about Lena's confidence, her natural leadership, her refusal to shrink under authority, ignited a dangerous flame in Miss Simmons. The teacher had once dreamed of being a writer, a public speaker, someone who shaped minds and changed hearts. Instead, she'd become trapped in a classroom, watching students like Lena achieve the boldness she'd never possessed. As Lena entered room 204 that morning, the air felt heavy with unspoken tension. The desks were arranged in their usual horseshoe pattern, and she took her seat near the middle, exchanging thumbs up with her group members. Miss Simmons stood at her desk, arms crossed, her face a mask of cold determination. "Before we begin with presentations," she announced abruptly, "I need to address something important." Lena blinked, confusion washing over her face. Her classmates shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "I've been reviewing the school dress code over the weekend," Miss Simmons continued, walking slowly toward the center of the room like a circling vulture. "And I've noticed that some students seem to believe certain rules don't apply to them." The room fell silent. Every student felt the electricity in the air, the sense that something terrible was about to unfold. Miss Simmons' eyes locked onto Lena with laser precision, particularly those who think that elaborate hairstyles are appropriate for a learning environment. Lena's heart began to race. "Excuse me," she asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm talking about you, Lena. That hairstyle is a distraction. It draws attention and it's not in line with school standards." Whispers rippled through the classroom like wildfire. Lena's group members stared in disbelief, their mouths hanging open. "This is the same braid I've worn all year," Lena said, trying to keep her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. Miss Simmons didn't flinch. "And maybe I've been too lenient. Maybe it's time we enforce the rules properly." "This feels personal," Lena said, her voice cracking slightly. "It's not personal. It's about discipline. If we let one student treat school like a fashion show, what message does that send to others?" Lena glanced around the room desperately. No other student had been called out for their appearance. No other student was being humiliated in front of their peers. Miss Simmons stepped closer, her voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "I expect you to correct it by tomorrow, or there will be serious consequences." The bell rang, cutting through the tension like a knife. The damage was done, but this was only the beginning of a nightmare that would shake the entire school system to its core. The rest of that Monday felt like walking through quicksand. Lena delivered her portion of the group presentation, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. Inside, something precious had been cracked: her sense of safety, her belief that she could exist peacefully in her own skin. During lunch, her best friend Kayla pulled her aside near the cafeteria entrance. "She can't do that," Kayla said fiercely, her dark eyes flashing with anger. "It's racist and personal. You need to report her immediately." "I'm fine," Lena lied, forcing a smile that felt like broken glass. "It's just hair." But it wasn't just hair, and they both knew it. It was about control, power, and the systematic targeting of a student who dared to exist authentically. It was about a grown woman using her authority to break down a teenager's spirit. That evening at dinner, John Cena noticed immediately that something was wrong. His daughter, usually animated and talkative, picked at her food in silence. Her shoulders were tense, her eyes distant. "You're quiet tonight," he said gently, setting down his fork. "Want to talk about it?" Lena hesitated, staring at her untouched mashed potatoes. Finally, she looked up, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "There's this teacher. She's been targeting me for months, but today she crossed a line. She said my hair was a distraction, that it didn't belong in a classroom." John's jaw tightened imperceptibly, but his voice remained calm. "Did she touch you?" "No," Lena said quickly. "Not yet." Those two words, "not yet," hung in the air like a threat. John nodded slowly, his protective instincts fully awakened. "Let me know if she does anything else," he said. "You don't have to handle this alone." Lena managed a grateful smile, but that night, as she sat in bed brushing her curls, a seed of dread took root in her chest. She had seen something dangerous in Miss Simmons' eyes. Not just prejudice or ignorance, but something colder and more calculated. A hunger for power that wouldn't be satisfied until Lena was completely broken. The next morning arrived gray and heavy, mirroring Lena's troubled sleep. She had tossed and turned all night, Miss Simmons' words echoing in her mind like a cruel chant. "A distraction doesn't belong consequences." Standing before her bathroom mirror, Lena traced her fingers through her curls slowly, reverently. These weren't just strands of hair. They were her last tangible connection to her mother, the piece of heritage her father had taught her to wear with pride. For a moment, she considered tying them up tighter, maybe covering them with a scarf. Anything to avoid another confrontation. But something deep in her heart pushed back against that impulse. She would not change who she was to appease someone else's prejudice. At breakfast, John noticed the exhaustion in her eyes. "Rough night?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. "I almost changed my hair this morning," Lena admitted quietly, just so she wouldn't have anything to say. John leaned forward, his expression serious. "You don't change who you are to make a bully feel better, especially when you've done nothing wrong. I just don't want to make things worse." "You existing the way you are is not what makes things worse, Lena. People like her do." She held onto those words like a lifeline as she walked through the school hallways. The tension from the previous day had spread like wildfire. Whispers followed her, some sympathetic, others curious. A few students offered supportive nods, but many looked away, preferring the safety of silence to the risk of involvement. When Lena stepped into room 204, the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Miss Simmons stood at her desk with arms folded, that same condescending smirk playing across her lips. "You're testing my patience," she said before Lena even reached her seat. Lena's chest tightened, but she kept her voice steady. "I followed the dress code." "You followed your own version of it," Miss Simmons snapped back. "And since you clearly don't understand boundaries, I've decided we need to address the situation right now." A chill ran down Lena's spine as her classmates froze in their seats. The air crackled with tension, and everyone could sense that something terrible was about to happen. "Everyone put your phones away," Miss Simmons commanded sharply. Some students obeyed immediately, but others hesitated. A few quietly activated their camera apps and positioned their phones low, instinct telling them to document whatever was about to unfold. Miss Simmons moved to her desk drawer, and Lena's eyes tracked her movement with growing horror. When the teacher's hand emerged, it was holding something that made Lena's blood freeze in her veins. Clippers. Electric hair clippers, buzzing to life with a menacing hum. "You've left me no choice," Miss Simmons said, approaching Lena with terrifying calm. "Since you won't respect the rules, you'll learn them the hard way." Lena's breath caught in her throat. "You can't be serious. I warned you. Now you'll understand what happens when you defy authority." Before Lena could retreat, two students, Jason and Tyler, longtime favorites of Miss Simmons, stood up and moved toward her with mechanical obedience. "What are you doing?" Lena shouted, panic rising in her voice as realization struck. Jason grabbed one of her arms, while Tyler seized the other. The classroom erupted in shocked gasps and confused shouts. "Stop!" Someone screamed from the back of the room. "Let her go!" Another voice cried out. But Miss Simmons raised her voice above the chaos. "Sit down, all of you. This is what happens when someone thinks they're above the rules." The room fell into stunned, horrified silence. The only sound was the ominous buzzing of the clippers, growing louder as Miss Simmons approached Lena's chair. The storm had finally arrived, and it was about to destroy everything in its path. What happened next would haunt the halls of North Valley High School forever. Lena fought against Jason and Tyler's grip, but 17-year-old arms were no match for two athletic seniors who had been turned into willing accomplices by a teacher's twisted authority. "Don't do this," Lena pleaded, her voice breaking as tears began to stream down her cheeks. "Please, Miss Simmons, I'm begging you." But Miss Simmons' eyes had gone cold and empty, like looking into the depths of a frozen lake. She grabbed a handful of Lena's beautiful black curls, the same curls her father had braided countless times, the same curls her mother had once lovingly styled, and raised the clippers. Then it happened. The sound of the blades cutting through Lena's hair was deafening in the silent classroom. A collective gasp rose from 30 horrified teenagers as the first long, beautiful lock fell to the floor like a dying bird. Lena's body went rigid. Her breath caught in her throat as if someone had physically struck her. The humiliation was so overwhelming that she couldn't even scream. She just sat there, frozen in shock, as Miss Simmons made another pass with the clippers. More hair fell. Chunks of her identity, pieces of her connection to her mother, fragments of her pride scattered across the cold linoleum floor. Students throughout the classroom had different reactions to the horror unfolding before them. Some turned away, tears streaming down their faces. Others sat paralyzed, unable to process what they were witnessing. A few brave souls kept their phones recording, knowing instinctively that the world needed to see this injustice. "This is abuse," someone whispered, but their voice was swallowed by the terrible silence that had settled over the room. "Stop recording." Miss Simmons barked at the students with phones, but she didn't stop her assault on Lena's hair. Another pass of the clippers. Another piece of Lena's soul hitting the floor. When Miss Simmons finally stepped back, breathing heavily from her exertion, Lena looked like a completely different person. The front and sides of her hair had been hacked away, leaving patches of exposed scalp and uneven tufts of what remained of her beautiful curls. "There," Miss Simmons said with disturbing satisfaction, her voice dripping with false authority. "Now maybe you'll focus on your education instead of drawing attention to yourself." Lena sat motionless for a long moment, her chest rising and falling with shallow, rapid breaths. The classroom remained deadly silent, every student too shocked to move or speak. Then, With movements that seemed to require enormous effort, Lena slowly stood up. Her legs trembled beneath her, but she managed to stay upright. She didn't run. She didn't scream. She didn't collapse into tears, though everyone could see them flowing silently down her cheeks. Instead, she walked. Step by step, holding onto whatever dignity remained, she walked toward the classroom door. Her head was high despite the humiliation, her shoulders straight despite the devastation. The hallway seemed to stretch forever as Lena made her way to the nearest bathroom. Students in the corridor stopped talking when they saw her. Some gasped audibly. Others pulled out their phones to record. Word spread like wildfire through the school's social media networks. In the bathroom, Lena finally allowed herself to look in the mirror. The reflection staring back at her was foreign, shocking, heartbreaking. Her scalp showed through in patches where Miss Simmons had cut too close. The remaining hair stuck up at odd angles, making her look like a victim of some terrible accident. That's when the tears really came. Hot, angry, heartbroken sobs that echoed off the bathroom tiles. She pressed her hands to her mouth, trying to muffle the sounds of her grief. Her trembling fingers found her phone and dialed the one number that had always meant safety, protection, and unconditional love. "Dad," she sobbed when John Cena answered on the first ring. "Lena, what's wrong?" His voice was immediately alert, concerned. She shaved my hair off. In front of everyone. She humiliated me." The silence on the other end of the phone was more terrifying than any shout could have been. When John finally spoke, his voice was calm, controlled, and absolutely deadly. "I'm coming," he said simply. "I'm coming right now." He didn't ask for details. He didn't ask which teacher or what had led up to it. He didn't need to know anything except that his daughter had been attacked, humiliated, and broken by someone who was supposed to protect her. John Cena hung up the phone, grabbed his car keys, and walked out of his house without looking back. Behind him, he left a half-eaten sandwich and a cup of coffee that would grow cold. Ahead of him lay a reckoning that would shake North Valley High School to its very foundations. Back in room 204, Miss Simmons returned to her desk and began writing on the whiteboard as if nothing had happened. She assigned the next chapter in the textbook and reminded students about their upcoming quiz. Her voice perfectly normal, perfectly calm. But the students in her classroom would never be the same. They had witnessed something that would haunt them forever. The moment a trusted adult had used her power to destroy a child's dignity in the most public, humiliating way possible. They sat in stunned silence, some still secretly recording, others texting furiously to spread word of what they had seen. The videos were already beginning to upload to social media platforms. Screenshots were being shared. Messages were flying across group chats throughout the school. Miss Simmons had no idea that she had just made one critical miscalculation. She thought Lena was just another student she could break and intimidate. She forgot that Lena had a father who was not just famous, but who possessed the kind of moral strength and protective fury that could move mountains. And he was on his way. The wheels of justice, delayed for too long, were finally beginning to turn. But first would come something far more immediate and terrifying. A father's righteous anger, unleashed at full force against those who had dared to harm his child. The sound of John Cena's truck pulling into the North Valley High School parking lot was like thunder rolling across a battlefield. Students gathered near windows to watch as the WWE superstar stepped out of his vehicle, and what they saw made them take instinctive steps backward. This wasn't John Cena the entertainer, the man who made children smile and granted wishes for sick kids. This was John Cena the father, and he was absolutely terrifying in his controlled fury. His jaw was locked tight enough to crack teeth. His shoulders were set like a linebacker preparing for impact. Every step across that parking lot carried the weight of parental justice that had been too long delayed. Students parted before him like water before a ship's bow. Teachers who glimpsed him through classroom windows felt their conversations die in their throats. The very air seemed to vibrate with the intensity of his purpose. He didn't need to ask for directions to room 204. He had been to enough parent-teacher conferences, school plays, and award ceremonies to know these hallways by heart. But more than that, his instincts were guiding him. The same instincts that had protected Lena through years of single parenthood after her mother's death. A young staff assistant tried to intercept him near the main office. "Excuse me, sir. Do you have an appointment?" John's eyes met the man's, and whatever the assistant saw there made him step aside immediately, his question dying on his lips. There are moments when words become unnecessary, when a person's intentions are written so clearly in their expression that conversation becomes irrelevant. The sound of John's boots hitting the tiled hallway floor echoed like a countdown to Judgment Day. Each step brought him closer to the classroom where his daughter had been violated, humiliated, and broken by someone who had sworn an oath to protect and educate children. Inside room 204, Miss Simmons stood at the whiteboard, droning on about Reconstruction-era policies as if the last hour hadn't happened. She was trying desperately to maintain the illusion of normalcy, to convince herself and her students that what she had done was justified, routine, forgotten. But the classroom energy had shifted dramatically. Every student was glancing toward the door, holding their breath, waiting for something they couldn't quite name, but definitely felt approaching. Then the door exploded open. John Cena didn't knock. He didn't wait for permission. He struck the door with such force that it swung back and slammed against the wall, making every person in the room jump as if they'd been physically shocked. He stood in the doorway, his massive frame filling the entire space, his chest rising and falling with barely controlled rage. The silence that followed was absolute and deafening. His eyes scanned the room methodically, taking in every detail. The scattered pieces of his daughter's hair still visible on the floor, the clippers sitting openly on Miss Simmons' desk, the terrified faces of students who had witnessed something they would never forget. When his gaze finally settled on Miss Simmons, she took an involuntary step backward. Whatever she saw in his eyes made her mouth go dry and her hands begin to shake. "Where is she?" John's voice cut through the silence like a blade through silk. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The quiet intensity was far more frightening than any shout could have been. Miss Simmons tried to compose herself, to reclaim some semblance of authority. "She left after last period. I don't know where she went." John stepped into the classroom, each movement deliberate and calculated. "You know exactly what you did." "I followed school policy," Miss Simmons stammered, her voice suddenly shaky and uncertain. Her hair violated the dress code. "I had to take corrective action." "You shaved my daughter's head." The words came out measured and precise, like a prosecutor reading charges. "That's an exaggeration. It was a correction. I warned her multiple times about." "You touched her." John took another step closer, and Miss Simmons backed against the whiteboard. "You humiliated her. You broke her." "I didn't mean." "You did it in front of the entire class. You made a public example of her. And now you're going to face the consequences." Behind John, students were raising their phones again, not out of disrespect, but out of recognition that they were witnessing something historic, a moment when justice finally arrived for someone who had suffered in silence for too long. Principal Matthews appeared in the doorway, breathing heavily from running down the hallway. "Mr. Cena, we need to take this to my office immediately." John turned his head slightly, his voice never losing its deadly calm. "Then lead the way." The procession to the principal's office felt like a funeral march. John walked behind Principal Matthews, his presence so commanding that other staff members emerged from their rooms to watch. Word had already spread throughout the building. John Cena was here, and someone was about to be held accountable. In the principal's office, Lena sat quietly on a bench, her scalp covered by a scarf the school nurse had provided. Her eyes were red from crying, but she had stopped weeping. When she saw her father enter the room, her entire body seemed to exhale with relief. She stood up, and without a word, John opened his arms. She collapsed into them, finally safe, finally protected. He held her tightly for a long moment, his hand gently stroking what remained of her hair. No questions, no demands for explanations, just the pure, unconditional love of a father for his wounded child. When he finally turned to face Principal Matthews and the school attorney, who had now joined them, his voice was steel wrapped in ice. "You let this happen. You gave her authority, and she used it to attack my daughter. That's battery. That's assault. That's a hate crime." The attorney tried to speak, but John raised his hand to silence him. I've already spoken to the police. I've sent the videos to every news outlet I know. You can try to cover this up, or you can fix it. But either way, I'm not walking out of here quietly. Principal Matthews shifted uncomfortably in his chair. We'll be launching a full investigation. Miss Simmons is currently being suspended pending review. Suspended. John's voice was quiet, but the room seemed to tilt with the force of his contained anger. She shouldn't be teaching another day. Not in this building. Not anywhere. The battle for justice had begun, and John Cena was just getting started. Within 6 hours, the world knew Lena's story. The videos shot by brave students spread across social media like wildfire, each share accompanied by outraged comments and demands for justice. The hashtag Justice for Lena began trending nationally before the sun had set on that terrible day. The footage was impossible to deny. Miss Simmons approaching with clippers, Lena's terrified pleas, the gasps of horrified classmates, and the heartbreaking image of a young woman walking out of that classroom with her dignity intact despite having her identity literally cut away. By morning, news vans lined the street outside North Valley High School. Parents flooded the school board with emails and phone calls. Alumni posted messages of support. Civil rights organizations got involved. Lawyers offered free representation. The student body organized their own response. When classes resumed the next day, hundreds of students gathered outside the building holding signs. Hair is not a crime. We stand with Lena. Accountability now. Some wore head scarves in solidarity. Others had shaved parts of their own heads. Their message was clear. They would not let this injustice stand. Teachers watched from windows, many with tears in their eyes. Some were ashamed of their profession. Others were angry at the system that had allowed such abuse to flourish. The few who had suspected Miss Simmons' prejudices felt guilty for not speaking up sooner. Inside the administrative offices, chaos reigned. Phone calls from reporters, lawyers, and civil rights activists never stopped. The school board called emergency meetings. The superintendent issued statements promising full cooperation with all investigations. Miss Simmons was nowhere to be seen. A terse statement announced her immediate termination, effective immediately. Criminal charges were being reviewed by the district attorney's office. Her teaching certificate was under investigation by the state education department. But Lena stayed home that first day. She needed space to heal, to process what had happened, to decide how she wanted to move forward. She watched the protests online, saw friends and strangers standing up for her story, and for the first time since the attack, she allowed herself to smile. The messages were overwhelming, thousands of them from girls who had been bullied for their hair, from students who had suffered quietly under prejudiced teachers, from women who had faced humiliation and found hope in Lena's quiet strength. Fame wasn't healing, though. Healing came slowly, privately, in long talks with her therapist, in the way her father listened without trying to fix everything, in the way her best friend Kayla showed up every day just to sit beside her. It came in long showers where she could cry without anyone watching, and in quiet moments when she realized she was stronger than she had ever imagined. When Lena decided to return to school 2 weeks later, it was entirely her choice. John had offered homeschooling, private tutors, online classes, anything to keep her safe and comfortable. But Lena said no. "I don't want to hide," she told her father one evening. That's what she wanted. She wanted me to disappear, to be ashamed, to give up. I won't do that. Her return was extraordinary. As John's truck pulled into the school parking lot, students were already gathering at the entrance. When Lena stepped out, everything stopped. Then something beautiful happened, applause, but not the wild cheering kind. It was slow, rhythmic, respectful, starting with a few students and spreading like ripples across water. Hands clapping, heads nodding, voices calling out support. Teachers stood in doorways and windows, many with tears in their eyes. This wasn't just applause for a brave teenager. It was applause for dignity, for justice, for the refusal to be broken. Lena walked toward the school entrance with her head high, her shoulders straight. Her hair was still short, still growing back, but it no longer looked like the result of an attack. She had styled it beautifully, owned it completely. John didn't walk beside her this time. He stood by his truck, arms crossed, watching with something far deeper than pride. It was reverence for his daughter's courage, for her choice to reclaim her space rather than surrender it. As Lena climbed the school steps, Kayla met her with a fierce hug. Then other friends joined them, then classmates she barely knew. Some wore scarves in solidarity. Others had cut their own hair in support. One teacher placed her hand over her heart and gave a respectful nod. The hallways had been transformed. Student council posters lined the walls. Your voice matters. Silence protects no one. We stand with Lena. The administration had implemented mandatory equity training, established an anonymous reporting system, and appointed an independent review board to examine not just this incident, but the culture that had allowed it. Room 204 had been reassigned to Mr. Ellis, a gentle man in his early 30s, who had reached out to Lena before her return to let her know she could skip his class if needed. But Lena chose to enter that room again, to sit in the same seat, to reclaim the space where she had been violated. "Welcome back, Lena," Mr. Ellis said simply when she walked in. "Thank you," she replied, and meant it. The day passed peacefully, filled with quiet acknowledgments, notes left on her desk, hugs in hallways, letters from the superintendent thanking her for her courage. But the most meaningful moment came during lunch. The principal had offered Lena a chance to address the school, only if she wanted to. At first she had declined, but then she remembered all the messages from young people who said her story had given them strength to speak up about their own experiences. Standing on the small outdoor stage near the cafeteria, microphone in both hands, Lena faced a crowd that included students, teachers, parents, and media representatives. The silence was complete and respectful. "I'm not going to pretend this was easy," she began, her voice clear and strong. "It wasn't. What happened to me hurt. Not just my hair, not just my pride, but something deeper. And it didn't just hurt me. It hurt all of us who have ever been told we were too different, too loud, too proud of who we are." She paused, looking out at faces that reflected her own journey: pain, anger, hope, determination. "I lost something that day, but I gained something too. I learned that I'm not alone, that silence is dangerous, that speaking up, even when your voice shakes, matters more than staying quiet." A gentle breeze rustled through the trees as Lena continued. "To every student who has ever felt invisible, or humiliated, or less than, you're not. You're more than enough. Your story matters. Your dignity matters. And this," she ran her hand gently over her short hair, "this doesn't define me. I define me." The applause that erupted was thunderous, sustained, and filled with love. Students stood on benches, chanting her name. Others wiped away tears of recognition and hope. John Cena, standing at the edge of the crowd with his arms folded and eyes shining with unshed tears, gave a slow, powerful nod of approval. His daughter had not just survived. She had transformed trauma into triumph, pain into purpose. That evening, as they sat together on their back porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, John spoke the words that would stay with Lena forever. "You changed something today, kid." Lena didn't look away from the sunset. She tried to take my voice. Instead, she made me louder. John smiled, placing his hand over hers. "You're not just unbreakable, Lena. You're unforgettable." And she was. What had started as an act of cruelty had become a powerful story of resilience, justice, and the unbreakable bond between a father and daughter. Lena's journey reminded everyone that silence in the face of injustice is complicity, that dignity cannot be taken away unless we surrender it, and that sometimes the most powerful response to hate is simply refusing to be broken by it. Her crown had been cut away, but her strength had grown back stronger than ever.